Yeah.
We'll be starting in a few minutes while we have people coming into the meeting. So we'll start in a few minutes. Rooms fill in a lot different on Zoom than they do in person, as we see this going. Should we give it 1 or 2 more minutes?
I'm unmuting to say hi. Then I'm going to mute again. It's Patty. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Joe. It's Janelle.
Yeah. Well, we'll give it 1 more minute. Some people are still coming into the meeting.
How many people are expected, Joe?
Well, the registrations were around 70, I believe. Okay. Okay. Well, let's get started. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for our community workshop on Zoom. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Town Council. We thank you for attending tonight's online workshop to discuss modernizing the Ross Civic Center. The Town Council and staff very much want to hear from you, the residents, on this important project. I am Joe Chin, the town manager. Also with us tonight is the entire Ross Town Council. We have Mayor Julie McMillan, council members Elizabeth Robbins, Elizabeth Breckus, Beach Cool, and Bill Kircher. The council members' role this evening is to listen to the residents. And unlike a normal council meeting, they will not be engaging in any of the conversations, but only listening. From the town staff tonight, I have with me Ross Valley Fire Department Fire Chief Jason Weber, Police Chief Eric Masterson, Public Works Director Rich Simonich, Planning and Building Director Patrick Streeter, and Town Clerk Linda Lopez. Tonight's workshop is being facilitated by MIG Consultants. From MIG with us tonight is Lou Hexter, Jesse Hernandez, and the lead facilitator for tonight's meeting, Carolyn Verheyen. And I will now hand it over to Carolyn to give you to go over the objectives and the agenda for tonight.
Right. Thanks, Joe. And thank you all for turning out tonight. Very much appreciated. We have a great workshop planned for you to achieve these objectives. As you see on the screen there, we really want to convey some information about the need for modernization of your civic center, in particular location of fire services and some of the other services that are currently provided there, and get your initial thoughts about it. So part of it is, educational, informational, but then we really want to hear from you. This is foundational though. We don't have a project defined as yet. So the questions that we're posing tonight are initial and foundational in nature, and will help shape a future project for the Civic Center. So we look forward to an exciting discussion after our presentation, and the agenda, as you'll see, which I think you received in advance, will provide you with that background information from Joe, your town manager, and from Chief Weber. And then we'll get right into small group breakout groups, because that gives you the chance to, gives everyone a chance to speak. So we'll be set up to facilitate and receive your comments on those 3 questions or 4 questions that you see there. We'll also be doing some Zoom polling just to get a read from the group and see what your initial thinking is on these topics. So we'll have our group breakout conversations and then hear back from volunteer reporters who provide a quick summary just to give a flavor for the conversation that happened in the breakout groups. We will be recording this session and the breakout groups as well. We'll be keeping fairly detailed notes, and all of those will appear in a summary report. You may have questions as well following the presentation. We'll receive some of those questions via chat, and we may not be able to answer all your questions tonight, but we will answer them in the workshop summary report. So be looking for that just a week or so from now. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Zoom and how it works, although I think we've got some Zoom pros. You've all come in on mute and with your names showing, which is very much appreciated. So if you're on computer, obviously you use that toolbar that pops up when you kind of move your cursor down, and that way you can mute and unmute yourself to the far left. You can stop your video if you wish, although we very much appreciate seeing you all. If you're on your phone, just use your mute button on your phone in case there's any background noise. We'd love it if you raise your hands to speak using that function of Zoom. So you go to the participants icon there, right under the number 2, and click on the raise hand button associated with your name. And that's also where you can change, rename yourself as well. If you're on your phone, just hit *9 and that'll indicate to me that you wish to speak. Most of the talking though will probably be in the small groups, with the exception of a couple questions we'll take after the presentation. So we will be relying quite a bit on the chat function, not in the small groups though, but in the large group. So if you want to make a comment or you have a question, go ahead and put that in the chat, and that comment or question will go to all of us. And as I say, we'll be able to answer some of your questions tonight, probably not all of them, because we really want to reserve time to hear from you. So that's what we have in store for you tonight. And we wanted to start with just a couple of key questions just to test out the polling function and get a sense of who's in the room. So Jesse, what's our first question? Here you go. How long have you lived in Ross? And go ahead and click on the appropriate answer to indicate how long you've lived there. And then the second question we'll get to in a moment, but first, let's see what our results are for how long have you lived in Ross. A lot of long timers came in right away. Look at that, wow. I think everybody is voting at this point. So a number of you have been in the town for a long time, 60%, 20% for 10 to 19 years. Interesting. And then some under 10 years. All right. Well, thank you for participating in that question. Now scroll down to question 2. Have you ever been inside the police and fire station? And you can select all that apply. If you haven't been in either, obviously you would click that last one. But most of you have. Wow. Okay. Most of you have been inside the police station. I won't ask why. Some of you have been inside the fire station, 40%. And in the fire bays on tours and such, 20%. So, okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Now, we are ready to proceed to our presentation. So I will turn it to Joe to provide you with that background information. Thank you all. Joe's on mute. There he goes.
I was just, thank you, Carolyn. And if we could share screen real quickly. Thank you, Carolyn. Give you a little background about the facilities. The fire station was constructed in 1927, along with 2 houses on each of its sides. The house to the south was converted to the current police station. The current buildings, well, it's kind of a buildings, are physically and functionally obsolete. They do not meet the 1986 Essential Service Act requirements for public safety constructions. They're not built to today's or current building code standards. The buildings have very significant deterioration, and designs are not up to the current safety standards. There are significant seismic deficiencies that it would be cost prohibitive to fix due to the construction of these facilities and the irregular shape of the facilities. The fire bays are below the 100-year flood elevation and need to be elevated. To go through a little aerial of the site and walking through the original fire station.
If I could interrupt you real quick, you might want to go to full screen mode so we can just see a little better.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yep. Should be under view.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Patrick. The fire station, originally built in 1927, is here, and as you're driving down Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, you see the fire bays there. The police station was this house, right, that was a house, never designed to be an office or let alone a police station, is here. In sometime after these 2 houses and the station was built in the 1930s or 40s, infill construction was constructed at a relatively low construction level, quality-wise, even at that time. In 1995, there was a new fire bays built back here at the back of the station. The reason the fire engines were relocated from the front is because over time they got too big to fit in these bays, and we're back in this area. Since 2005, the on-duty fire personnel have not been sleeping in the fire station. Instead, they're in a portable trailer, right, that's located here on the north end, and are at this location. And you can see that's also a considerable distance when there's a call for service in the night and they're sleeping to get from here to the fire base to go on the call for service. There is a garage canopy, a temporary garage canopy built here to house other vehicles that can't fit at the current site. We're not talking about changes, anything to the normal city hall. It's to the public safety and the administrative side on the staff. we have a portable here that houses staff. In 2020, this year, we had an assessment by CDS of the building, and CDS is a construction management firm, and they found it would be cost prohibitive to correct the numerous deficiencies and non-compliance issues with the safety building. This finding is similar to a 2010 report by another construction firm, MAC5, that found the same thing. The building has many, many structural deficiencies. I mentioned there's a lack of seismic upgrades at the foundations, lack of floor girder connections. We have infill construction. This picture of the roof largely needs to be replaced, but this also shows the quality of construction, the hodgepodge nature of putting this building together. The photo on the right, also the mechanical systems are at their end of the life and need to be fully replaced. This photo at the right, this is a dehumidifier. There's a couple of these in the fire station to help cool the station because the air conditioning doesn't do too good of a job. There's a lot of, the plumbing system needs to be totally replaced in its entirety. There's significant mold and water damage throughout the police station and fire station. There's been pest damage in numerous places, and every time we uncover something else or go under the surface, there's usually some other issues. To give a sense of the station, this photo on the top left, this is the police station, the operating station. This is leaks in the ceiling. This is the fire station with leaks and things removed. This is the fire office. You can see the windows leaking and the issues underneath. And then we really get into the public safety building of kind of how bad can it get. There's holes in the floor in the part we've closed down. This is in the bathroom. Lots of damage of water, mold, and other issues. In 2013, this picture here, there was a desire and a project to try to renovate part of this house to move the firefighters from what was to be a temporary portable into the fire station. And once they took down the walls, there were so many other issues that project ceased. Outside of the deterioration, there are a number of other site issues. I mentioned this, the building's very irregularly shaped, inefficient. We have site circulation issues. We only have one main entrance for public safety vehicles, fire, ambulance, and police, and the public and town hall staff all coming through here. Obviously, this creates some dangerous interactions when lights and sirens are racing around and people turning into this. With a new station, the likely thing we do is build a safety entrance office, Laurel Grove intersection with the lights for the fire and to directly enter onto the roadway, and have a different one for public and town hall staff. There is a flood risk on the parcel. In the parcel, even in 2017, when we had 3 rainstorms ranging from a 5-year storm to a 7-year storm, the water gets high enough that we have to move all the fire, police, and ambulance vehicles from this site over to the Magic site across the street, which is higher ground. Not a good place when you have emergency situations of floods and you can't operate out of your main police and fire stations. Instead, you're operating out of a parking lot. We have been reviewing multiple options of how do we fix this situation. The 2 primary options we're calling option A, and that is a joint police fire station, including paramedic quarters, similar to today, and also adding the administrative space at the town hall site. Option B is not to build a fire station. And in this case, we'd have police and the administrative staff in one building and a modular for the paramedic quarters without the fire station. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Fire Chief Jason Weber, who will go through the operating issues and considerations related to fire and paramedic service.
Thank you, Joe. You're going to keep the PowerPoint, so we'll move on. Perfect. Alrighty. Community members, thank you for being here tonight and engaging in this important conversation. I started my career in this building as a firefighter paramedic and have kind of seen the challenges over time, looking at everything from substantial remodel to replacement. And it really is in about the worst condition of any fire station in the county. And 100 years is a very good life for a fire facility, but certainly due for replacement. So I'll start with a little background. Ross is one of 4 members of the Joint Powers Authority that makes up the Ross Valley Fire Department. 4 stations in the communities of Ross, San Anselmo, Sleepy Hollow, and Fairfax, serving about 25,000 residents, just over 2,500 of those in the community of Ross. Daily staffing includes 9 fire personnel with Ross Valley Fire Department, and then 2 additional firefighter paramedics that work for the county that staff the ambulance that's based out of the Ross Fire Station. Those are 2 people on each engine of the 4 engines across the communities I spoke about earlier, and then 1 on-duty battalion chief. The medic unit that's based out of Ross is part of the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority and covers a pretty large area from Woodacre to Highway 101, which is about normal for paramedic ambulances. There's less of those than there are fire engines in each community. I think it's important to note one thing. We're having this conversation about an alternative service model because we feel comfortable having that conversation. But ultimately, it is a community decision, the level of fire protection and the associated costs of that. What I mean by that is there isn't federal or state regulations that determine how many fire trucks or fire personnel you have per square mile, per population. And historically, the fire service has grown from volunteer fire companies, often with stations situated in the center of a community, to larger consolidated organizations like Ross Valley Fire Department. What that means is that communities were built around these town centers. Typically, these departments transition from volunteer to part volunteer, part paid, to pretty much today full-time paid personnel. And what the challenges us with in the fire service is that if we were to change everything today, we probably wouldn't put fire stations exactly where they're at. But because of land costs, building costs, jurisdictional boundaries of fire agencies, et cetera, we're kind of left with a built environment. Joe, next slide. Anytime you're looking at replacing a facility, you want to study where your calls are, what's the time frame for getting there, what's the risk in the community. That's called the standards of coverage. And we did that in 2019 to help inform our decisions and ultimately bring some recommendations back to your community. It's an important process, as all of you want us to use data, of course, to make decisions and help inform you. Overall, that study gave us some information. One of those is that there's a relatively low number of incidents in Ross. And I think we could expect that. It's not a community in crisis. Of those incidents, around 627 calls for service in a 2-year period, 292 of those, or just shy of 300, required lights and sirens. And about almost 90% of those were medical calls, as we'd expect in a community with similar demographics. A very low number of those were fires, 3 actual fires over a 2-year period. And 9% were other service calls. So that's calling because of the trees fallen, power lines down, there may be something going on in the house that you need help with, etc. So Ross has enjoyed a very high level of service for the volume and complexity of incidents. Overall, the response time in Ross is good for a suburban community at 7 minutes and 55 seconds. Making adjustments to our fire protection would increase the response time for a fire engine by about 2 minutes. And why that's important to understand is we're still within that kind of edge of suburban, pushing a little bit on the high end of suburban at 9+ minutes. But keeping an ambulance in Ross for those 90% of the calls I spoke about, which is the pretty much the majority, wouldn't really change our response times. So that means about 85% of the time we'd have that ambulance in the community and to respond to those calls. So there would be, in that case, no net change to having a first responder at your door within that average of 7 minutes and 55 seconds. Now, the 15% of that time that they were committed, you would have another 2 minutes. It's also important to note that the police officers will still be in town. They carry AEDs and would also be responding to those critical medical calls like a cardiac arrest. Next slide, Joe. So where would the fire truck come from if the community chooses to change the service model? And that means it would be coming from one of two places. If it were a working fire, a reported fire, you get a fire truck from both Kentfield and San Anselmo, as you do now. San Anselmo Station is about 1.1 miles away. The Kentfield Fire Station is just over a half a mile away. In non-emergency calls, because Ross is a member of the Ross Valley Fire Department, most likely the service would be answered from the San Anselmo Station, as those service calls don't require lights and sirens, and an extended response time of several minutes wouldn't change the outcome. A little bit of understanding the Ross Valley Fire Department, and the Ross engine responds out of the town of Ross 145 times in that time period, when Ross enjoyed the response of other agencies about 18 times. So what that's saying is the Ross engine is leaving for incidents more than it's receiving. And that would be typical of a community with similar demographics adjacent to others that are busier. And another piece here as we talk through this is about 20% of the homes right now in Ross are sprinklered, and fire sprinklers are installed either during a substantial remodel or new construction. And as I think we're all aware, a lot of times when there's a transaction in real estate, those homes are modified substantially and the sprinkler system is installed. So in general, as a fire chief, I feel comfortable with having an alternative service model in Ross, and the community is going to make this decision ultimately, and then we will work with the allied agencies and partners of the Ross Valley Fire Department to determine how to best serve the community if a fire station was relocated, assuming we're leaving the ambulance there in Ross. And of course, I'll be open and available to any questions. I think that's the last slide, right, Joe?
Thank you, Chief. The town hired Mary McGrath Architects, who specialized in public safety and civic buildings, to develop a high-level conceptual site plan for each of the various building options, along with providing a rough cost estimate for each option. The two options were the primary ones we're discussing. Option A, that's rebuilding really the current facilities and the administrative side and its cost estimate's $28.4 million. If we go to option B, removing the fire station and still having paramedics in town, the cost gets reduced by roughly $14 million to $14.6 million. There are several potential funding sources. The town knowing this expenditure has been coming up, we've been actively saving money for this. We expect to have saved approximately $7 million when construction begins in a couple years. We will, as you see, there's still a cost difference here. So expect that we will need debt financing. Any debt financing would need a new tax measure, and all of them would require a 2/3 voter approval. We have not selected what type of tax or assessment we would use. 3 common ones are general obligation bonds, which are assessments against the property value. There's parcel taxes and community facilities districts. When we decide, we won't choose which mechanism to use till after the Civic Center is designed and we get a real cost estimate when we know what the actual design of the facility is. A third potential source for some funding could be donations or contributions from community members. So how does this translate to potential tax levels? We took as a hypothetical, looking at the average assessed value of a property in Ross of $2.6 million under option A with and building all the facilities would be about, and these would be likely a 30-year bond, so 30-year taxes, would be $1,350 per year per 2.6 million assessed value. And for option B without the fire station, it goes down about $860 a year to $490. Mind, interest rates are very low. They're expected to stay low, at least in the near term. But we ran runs based on slightly higher rates than this, but at the time we go bonding, it could be higher than this. Where are we in the process? We start this process dialogue back in August with community council meetings, community engagements, lots of articles in the morning after, townwide emails. We are going to have a questionnaire for Ross residents in November to help guide us on this discussion. In December, the target is for a council decision on what facilities should we modernize in Ross. And there's a chance it could be pushed back a month or two, but the target date is December. And then in 2021, it will be hiring a Civic Center master plan consultant, going through the concept and site and the facilities and the design, doing the environmental analysis required. We would have, after that's completed, both a master plan and an EIR would be when we'd be going for a potential ballot measure, which, as I said, would require 2/3 approval. And then, depending on the option, as the fire chief mentioned, if we do not have a fire station in town, we will have to be negotiating with our other Ross Valley Fire Department agencies, being San Anselmo, Fairfax, and Sleepy Hollow, on a new structure of moving from a 4-station district to 3-station, and with staffing moving, and also need to negotiate likely with Kentfield Fire District for any adjustments in fire coverage from there. And with that, I will want to say all of these processes are going to include significant public meetings, public participation and input. So we're now at decision number 1 phase, but there's more to come. With that, I'll turn it back to Carolyn.
Thank you, Joe and Chief Weber. Much appreciated. That's good background. Let's see, we have a couple of questions that have come in via chat, and Joe, perhaps you could scan those and answer at least a couple of them. If there are other questions, please, people put them in the chat. We'll try to get to a few of them at least, but answer the rest of them in our workshop summary report. So Joe, do you see questions from Sean, from Ruth, Ken, and Eric?
Okay, and I'm kind of reading them as I'm going through. So the building, when I say red tag, it was from the town red tag. The building was in so bad of condition with so many issues, we did not want anybody in that building. Why the building that was red tagged? Sorry, I should read the questions. Questions, why did we redo the 2010 study? I don't know. In 2010, I know they talked about possibly redoing the facilities, but they never followed through. And given we were 9-10 years later, we redid the whole building assessment of the 2010.
And option B, Ken's question is, does option B include new administration space?
Yes, it would be included with the police in effect, and that we would build the police building with administrative space built into one building instead of separating it from the safety side.
Very good. And Sean had a good suggestion for a different type of map that we could include in future presentations. So that's good. Then we had another question or a suggestion from Eric that we need an option C. Can you respond to that? Is there an option C, Joe?
We started back in August 13th council meeting. We had 4 options. We have, thought what came out were the 2 primary options. Certainly there are other options that could be looked at. We probably had more than 4 options to begin with, but in August 13th report had 4 options. These 2 seem to be the stronger candidates, meaning the community needs and looking at the cost to benefit ratio kind of thing.
Okay. All right. And I think there's just needs to be clarification. Are we starting with the assumption that a new building must be built given the current condition of the Civic Center? And of the 4 options, were any of them no tax options? Is that possible?
It's not possible. What the building assessment found, both of them have found, to rehabilitate the building would be at least equal to the cost of building new. And I would be happy to tour people in that facility if anybody, obviously we got COVID, but the building is way beyond its useful life. Obviously it's 93 years old, and parts of it were not constructed at a high level to begin with. And in other parts like the police station, it was a house built in 1927, not a police station. So there are so many costs and they can't meet. Part of this is you have to meet Essential Service Act standards for public safety buildings, which is a lot more rigorous than anything you'd see related to private construction of commercial buildings. Seismic is at a lot higher level, a lot more structural integrity is needed, more geotech work. And that alone, the consultants didn't think there may even be a way to seismically get this. And we also have an elevation issue, like the fire bays have to be elevated in a rebuild. So the no build or rehabilitate, this building's almost being held together by duct tape, but you saw duct tape there. The building is beyond its life. And I know the town has visited this question, I heard in the 1990s, and said a new station was needed in 2010, but then never followed through for whatever reasons to the next, which is actually because it's an expensive undertaking. And the other thing to understand, anything's going to be prevailing wage, which also makes it significantly more expensive than regular private development. But
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And then I think Ruth and Kevin had a second question there about looking at new service models. And I think option B is essentially a new service model where the fire service would come out of a neighboring firehouse, correct?
correct. Yeah. So we saw that as that really is a new service option. The other service option that was one of the 4 options, you could reduce cost it would reduce costs from the 14.6 to about 12 million. For about 2.5 million was not to have the paramedic quarters located here. But given the thinking was, so that is one of the 4 options. But we heard quite a bit, given all the emergency calls are for paramedics, the value of having the paramedics in town seems strong. If another service option would be to have the paramedics move to the Kentfield station or San Anselmo, it would reduce the cost some, but that would mean paramedics are 2 minutes further. Also keep a note, the paramedics are also firefighters. They're Marin County firefighters who happen to be paramedics that do 6 months shifts through the Ross, through the Ross paramedic fire station.
Okay, thank you, Joe. All right, we've got some other questions coming in that we'll answer in our workshop summary report, and there's also comments being logged, which we'll also report out verbatim in our workshop summary report. We're also set up to receive your comments in the small groups, which we'll go to shortly. I understand that a couple people could not see the poll results from our first couple of questions, so we've created some slides to convey that information to you. We asked you how long you've lived in Ross, and the vast majority have lived in Ross 20 or more years, with others being here for 10 to 19, 5 to 9, and then fewer people under 5. We also asked, have you ever been inside the police or the fire station? And that one you could check all that apply. Most people have been inside the police station, as you can see. Some have been inside the fire station, some have been inside the fire bays as well. And no one indicated that they've not been inside the police or fire station. So that is the beauty of a small town. That's great. Okay, now we have a couple of more poll questions for you, and then we'll organize you into your breakout groups. So thank you for your participation. Our next questions, Jesse? All right. What do you consider to be the most significant public safety need for the Ross community? And hopefully we've indicated some of the major choices there. If you choose other, go ahead and I'll probe for what those others might be. But you can see wildfire prevention and response, public safety power shutoff preparedness, police in the community, medical emergency response. Now, I know you want to pick more than one, but we're asking you the most significant public safety need for the Ross community. And I know they're all important. Let's just see what rises to the top from this group. And I understand some of you cannot see the results, so I'll go ahead and convey them to everybody. And you'll see if you're finished with question 1, there's another question. Have you heard about the need to modernize the Civic Center before tonight? And then question 3, what level of priority do you believe it is to modernize these facilities? Just to give you, just to get a quick read on this group, see where we're at before we go into our discussions. So for question 1, looks like medical emergency response is most important to 44% or 12 people who've participated, followed by wildfire prevention and response. 10 people indicated that. 11 people now. Police in the community, 3 people said that, and 2 people indicated that public safety power shutoff preparedness is the most significant public safety need. So pretty much medical emergency response and wildfire prevention are your top priorities in the community. Before tonight, most of you had heard about the need to modernize the Civic Center, probably reading the morning after and other publicity or news coverage. What level of priority do you believe it is to modernize these facilities? 50% think it's a high priority. 6 of you, 20%, feel neutral about it, perhaps needing more information or waiting for the discussion. Some indicate it's a somewhat high priority, 5 of you, 17%. Somewhat low priority, 2%, or I'm sorry, 2 people, and 2 people felt that this is a very low priority, perhaps compared to other expenditures or concerns in the community. So thank you for participating in those questions. Appreciate just getting a sense of the group thus far, and we'll hear a lot more from you now in our breakout groups. We do have 3 groups organized. We'll have facilitators, Patrick, myself, and Lou will be facilitating the groups, posing those 3 questions to you that appeared on the agenda. 1, what is your vision for the Civic Center building? Number 2, how important is it to keep a fire station in Ross? And are you willing to pay the additional amount that would be in order to have fire service located in the town? And then lastly, how important is keeping paramedic services stationed in Ross? So we'd really love to get a sense from the group what you'd like to see, how you feel currently about those 3 questions. We encourage you to vocalize, either raise your hand or just go ahead and jump in if you can. Facilitators will receive your comments, make notes. We'll also be looking for a volunteer reporter, somebody who can characterize the main points of discussion and report them to the full group. Just the highlights essentially. So that person can take their own notes objectively as possible. And I encourage that the volunteer reporter to also participate fully to the extent they can. So that would be most helpful. If you have any technical difficulties at all, you can't find your group or anything like that, you can private chat Jessie Hernandez. She will be standing by to assist, and she'll try to troubleshoot any problems that you might have. You have been kind of randomly pre-assigned to the breakout groups, and we're there to hear what you have to say. And we'll give you a sense of the timing. We want to reconvene by at least 7:35. It's now 6:48, so it gives us some time to have a discussion. So thank you all so much again for coming, and enjoy your breakout groups, those discussions, and we'll see you in a bit. Hit join when you see your invitation. That was a little abrupt, wasn't it? At least for my
It
group.
was very abrupt,
I got a 55-second
right?
alert, and one of our participants had just started to talk for the first time. So apologies to her, but we had a great discussion, and I trust you all did, even given the abrupt end. So thank you all for participating. Hopefully you're all back and had a chance to, okay, good. Carly is weighing in. She was the one who was about to speak in our group. She was just agreeing with another participant. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for your thoughts, opinions, suggestions, questions, ideas for additional data that might be needed or required. Our discussion was very, very valuable. So we would like to hear from the 3 breakout groups, just a few minutes of the highlights from the group. You don't have to report everything that was said by any means, but just give us a flavor, characterize the discussion. We weren't striving for consensus. There may be themes though that emerged in the discussion. So if there's any of those kinds of themes of agreement, we'd love to hear them. So let's start with our group, which I think was labeled group number 1, possibly, I'm not sure. And Marcia is our reporter. So I would turn over the floor to her to give us the highlights from our group discussion, and then we'll proceed through the groups. Marcia?
Thanks. Okay, where to start? I think that it seemed like there was a lot of thought about it. It was hard to evaluate this based on not having as much information about the costs. So for example, there's a information about the upfront cost savings between option 1 and 2, rebuild a fire station, to don't rebuild the fire station, but keep the police and the paramedics and the administrative office. So the question was asked, well, what's the ongoing costs of those? So of course you're saving more money by not rebuilding the fire station, but what does it really mean when you look kind of year over year? So then another person raised the question, which I thought was good, about, as a business, why are we thinking about building our own when a business may look at it and say, we can get these same services elsewhere for cheaper. Just another thought. There was a discussion around the fact that it's prestigious to have your own fire station, your own police force, and that was part of what made Ross special. So, there's things along those lines that people talked about. And I got the impression from listening to the group that a lot of it has to do with needing information and not understanding how decrepit the buildings were, and having that information not be out in the public as much as perhaps it should be, like, in other words, just how bad the buildings are. And so, it's that typical thing where more information is always more useful. So I think that was part of what we talked about. And the one other thing I would say, that I got the feeling that there was more concern about medical issues versus fire. And so that would be potential. I don't want to look like I'm weighing one way or the other. I'm really trying to keep this, as unbiased as possible. But I did get the sense that the medical issues, that medical concern and being able to respond medically was potentially more important than the fire station. So I don't know if I'm misspeaking, but that was my take.
I think most of our comments were in that regard. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Marcia. Great report. Okay. Anyone else from that group want to add in any major theme or highlight? Okay. Great. So again, we're keeping track of all the comments made, and they'll all be in the summary report. Lou, who was your reporter?
Molly was our reporter, or she was volunteered and then she accepted the nomination.
Yes, the same thing.
She didn't have any time to review the notes. So one way that we could do this, Molly, if you're comfortable, just if you can, from memory, talk about some of the highlights, and I can supplement, or the rest of the group could supplement with some of the key points that we had. But I will just preface this by saying our group had some difficulty with just the framing of the evening and in the questions themselves. So Molly, why don't you talk a little bit about that, the vision for the site, and also how people felt about keeping the fire station locally.
Okay, well, I'll appreciate your notes, Lou, because I think that our conversation, you know, there's some, you know, diversity of ideas, and our group basically had a lot of questions. And I think it you know, it's where it can become a can of worms. And when that happens, I think you step back and you realize that I think in this town, there is a desire for residents, whether you've lived here a year or you've lived here forever, to be involved in the process from the very beginning of the conversation. And you know, there and everybody kind of comes to that with different reasons, but I think it's important for it's part of their identity, I think, of living in Ross, is it's a small town, and decisions that are as fundamental as this, residents want to feel that they were included in the process from the beginning. Rather than kind of being, you know, shown a plan that, you know, where there are perfectly good options and there's a whole process ahead of us with a CEQA and an EIR that are going to be rigorous. Still, this goes to the identity of our town, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that people want to be included from the very beginning. And I think that the point is also made that more data is important to share, and that we hope that that'll be forthcoming. And Lou, any other specifics in terms of fire and paramedics?
Right. Well, just to reinforce what you said, I think there was a feeling in our group that the process had advanced a bit, and that there was a need to just back up a little bit and say, you know, what are we trying to accomplish here? And I do think we kind of got there. We heard some things about that. There was a sense that conflating the civic center concept of, like, you know, which is sort of a town center kind of thing, with the operations of the public safety functions, that seemed to be a sort of a surprise to the group, or they wanted some more input on that. That seemed like that was a decision that was already made, and maybe those functions could be decoupled. And so that was something that I think that we heard from as well. There were some specific things about, like, the location is somewhat constrained, that site is constrained, and so maybe we should be looking, you know, why do we have to build there? And so there was a question about that, I think. And I don't want to go into too much more detail, but also around fire services, there was people, or the fire station, most of the folks who spoke up were really convinced that having a fire station there was worth the investment, that people thought that it was perhaps put their own fire insurance in jeopardy if we didn't have a local response team housed in Ross. Perhaps that should be looked at. And there was also a significant question about whether, you know, yes, the construction costs were there, but if we save those construction costs and disperse the fire services elsewhere, would we be saving operationally, or would we still be paying our fair share of the operational costs? So that was a question also. And lastly, on paramedic, I think there was general consensus that, you know, paramedic, a lot of the responses or emergency responses were medical. And so it was important to keep paramedic services stationed nearby. But again, questions about, does it have to be right there at that location? Could it be somewhere else? And again, need for more information, more data, time response study, and so that everybody could agree that there's a rationale for why those services would be located in that spot. So those were And I apologize that I wasn't able to share those notes with you, Molly, beforehand. But anybody from our group, other points that I missed?
Yeah,
Right.
this is John Crane speaking.
Sure, John.
The biggest one is there's a huge distinction between a civic center and a police fire station. One is very utilitarian, that's the latter, the police fire. The other is trying to make it the center of attention, a civic center, which, as I said earlier, is more like where the Ross post office is. The current location doesn't really lend itself to foot traffic or anything like that. And as I said earlier, I just try to stay out of the way. The other thing I'm curious about, and this is kind of a new phenomena, which, you know, now that we're in the age of COVID, is Zoom. We have these instant pollings. You're talking to an advertising guy who's done a lot of polling, a lot of research. And I worked with the Institute of Governmental Studies. I just want to make it clear that the feedback we're getting is representative of the group here. It's not the town. And I'm curious as to how these numbers will be used because it's not scientific and
Yes.
it's not representative. And I
Yes.
hope people recognize that. And I'm all for opinion and things of that nature. But I've been in other Zoom meetings where these become like, wow, 62% said this, so that's what we're going to do.
Right.
It's just laying down the law. No.
Yes,
This is-
thank you, John.
And there's a huge polling problem across the country, which I won't get into. And it's been undermined since social media and everything got splintered. Polls are really questionable, and I would throw this one in that group. But I like what I'm hearing, and I understand this is representative of the group. That I have no problem with. It's not representative of the town.
Yes, we're clear on that for sure. And we didn't mean to imply that the poll was in any way reliable or representative of the town. It was more for fun and just to get a feel for how you're all, where you're at the get-go. So thank you.
I will just conclude with, I've seen other Zoom groups take the information from the polling as if it is a valid scientific response.
Yes, if we reported it all in our workshop summary report, we will definitely have that note that it is not intended to be representative. It's just simply the opinions of the group that happened to
Is
gather.
that going to be, Carolyn, is that going to be in 20-point type or 3-point?
It's going to be big and bold, let's say, for sure. It's a very important point. And even the questionnaire that will follow will make that very clear that that is not statistically valid. We do not intend to do spend the money at this point on a statistically valid, fully representative poll, if such a thing exists. So thank you, John, for that clarification.
Well, and thank you for acknowledging that. It's again, don't want to throw cold water on anything because I appreciate what the group discussion is. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you. All right, Patrick, who's your reporter?
Laura is our reporter for this breakout group.
Okay.
Hi. So our group, we focused on the importance of maintaining our own fire station. That we had discussion that for the high cost of if we were to build our own fire station, we want to keep it here, though. The importance of the fire department going back to being a Ross fire department, not Ross Valley. If we talked about that, we would like to have a better facility for the people who keep us safe, the police and fire departments. We'd like EMS to remain, would like more details flushed out. We talked about the concern about the impact on fire insurance rates, either policies being canceled or the rates increasing if we had a fire station that was not our own or further away. If we had our own fire department, the potential for the fire sirens decreasing, because we'd be servicing more just our town as opposed to San Anselmo. Question was raised about, learning more about the difference in, what the 2-minute difference in timing would have if we had our station and trucks far away. And we also talked about, like another group raised was, if our trucks were stationed elsewhere, the high cost that would possibly have, that we'd be paying someplace else. So would it really be a cost savings?
Thank you, Laura. Excellent report. Patrick, anything to add there from your group or others who were in?
Pretty good coverage. I would say that it was not consensus necessarily of keeping the fire station located in Ross, though that was kind of the stronger opinion. And as Laura mentioned, one thing that we hadn't even discussed before going into this breakout session was the idea of Ross Fire Department as opposed to Ross Valley. And that kind of plays back into, there was a lot of discussion about the town identity, and that, the town is known for its school and having its own police department. And so why not, as it used to, have its own fire department? Also, we had one member of the group who had actually experienced a fire on their property, and mentioned that both Kentfield and Ross arrived at around the same time. So that was a kind of some actual real world experience. Yeah, and there was general consensus on the keeping medical there. That was, everyone feels strongly about that. As Laura mentioned, as again, part of this identity, there's these people who are, their job is keeping us safe, and it reflects on the town, really, the kind of facility that we're giving them. So we want to make sure that there's a pride in that. And then lastly, the location of these services is centrally located in town. So it makes the most sense that these facilities should stay located on the site at the corner of Lagunitas and Sir Francis Drake, as opposed to looking at potentially cheaper options in other parts of town.
Okay, well, there we have a variety of opinion expressed this evening for sure. And there'll be a lot of further discussions and information to share. This group has very much helped shape future conversations in terms of what additional information you're interested in and how that might affect your opinions. So there's a lot more to come. Let's just cover briefly the next steps, Joe, and then let you go. So there will be a community questionnaire, as I mentioned before. Again, not a statistically valid survey by any means, but something that goes out to a broader group than those who were able to spend their evening with us this evening. There'll be a town council meeting. This is assuming everything stays on schedule. Town council meeting December 10th, and then we would go into some kind of design development once we have some programming, some of the elements of what will be in Ross versus not, once that's determined. So that is the preliminary schedule. Again, we may want to slow it down. We may want to back it up a little bit. There's a lot of questions that came through tonight, which was most helpful to hear from all of you. So any concluding, Richard wants to say something to the group, and then
I just want to ask a question, Carolyn, if I could, is exactly the mandate for MIG and their role in managing this process?
We were interviewed by the town, by Patrick and Joe, to help with the community outreach process and design the workshop and do a draft questionnaire for review by town staff, and to summarize the opinions that were expressed through those mechanisms. We may have other outreach as well.
The schedule you've proposed presupposes a decision-making process. is that a decision-making schedule that was generated by MIG, or is that mandated by town council?
I don't think there's any mandates. It certainly was not suggested by MIG. So let me turn to Joe for that answer.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I want to relate it to that. There is no mandate. What we do need to know is we got to move. Clearly, these facilities are in really shape that people shouldn't be working in. And we just got to get this. There's a lot of steps in this process, but there's no time now. Are we trying to make a decision sooner? It would be better to get a decision sooner. There's a lot of great, very, very good questions here and the view for additional information. And this is going to be really helpful having this workshop, hearing directly. Obviously, when we met in August, there were not many community who came to that meeting. So obviously having this process with the workshops, and this will help educate the questionnaire coming out in November. And so there's still, so I would see, and there's heard the need that maybe other choices get put on the table. So this has been very helpful to hear this, and obviously we'll take this, and we got a lot of information and questions to answer from the community here, and looking at potentially other options.
So thank you so much for your participation tonight. Please stay tuned, stay involved, and this is really only the beginning. Joe, back to you to close.
I want to thank everybody for your participation. I think that this has been great to get a large segment or some segment of the population and residents taking your evening. I know your time is valuable, so we greatly appreciate your participation. And you can always email us questions and thoughts. We want to continue to gather your input. There is, just so you know, there's a number of detailed studies and more information on the website. Behind everything you heard, there were at least 3 major studies. That have a variety of information. But obviously, we want to help answer your questions and get your thoughts on what is a very important community decision on what services and facilities do you want provided from the town. And obviously, there's a cost implication with that. And so I want to thank all of you very, very much. And MIG, Carolyn, Lou, and Jesse for your work in helping put this together, and the council members and staff for being here. And most of all, I want to thank you, the residents, for participating. Have a very good evening.
Have a good night. You all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.